Welcome to Al Bernstein Unplugged on Boxing. In a 40-year Hall of Fame career, Al has chronicled some of the greatest moments in boxing history. On this podcast, you get to hear him expand on those memories and talk about the current news in the sport of boxing. You also hear Al interview some of the biggest names in the sport. Here's Al Bernstein Unplugged.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of our podcast. Delighted that you could join us. It should be a fun episode. We're going to be visiting with Tom Yankello, who is a very, very good boxing trainer and has made an important niche for himself with his YouTube channel, the World Boxing Class channel, in which he does a lot of instructional videos, and it's really fascinating. And one of the other main reasons we wanted to chat with Tom is that he will be working with Roy Jones Jr. when he fights Mike Tyson in November. So we have a lot to talk about with Tom for sure. And joining me as always, my friend and co-host, Mr. Trip Mitchell. Trip, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. And you know, it's funny, in the last week, while you're getting ready for your big doubleheader pay-per-view, all the work, but you're starting to hear stuff come out of Roy Jones' camp that maybe this was a big mistake, that Tyson is too tough. It's funny how the fight game never changes. There's always certain things that fighters do to promote an upcoming fight.
Right, yeah, there's always stuff. And you know, Tom's conversation with us is very interesting. I think people are going to get a kick out of hearing it because he's a very analytical guy. And I mentioned his YouTube channel, which if people go on there and take a look at it, they will see that he's very analytical about the sport of boxing, and he's approached this in a very specific and analytical way for Roy Jones Jr. Of course, the problem with all of that is once you're inside the ring, if somebody who's powerful like Tyson hits you too well, all the analytics go out the window. But it'll be interesting to see. And, you know, as people, when they hear the interview, they'll hear the fact that essentially they're approaching this like a regular boxing match, you know, other than the fact that there are 12-ounce gloves and they've reduced the amount of rounds to 8 rounds. He said nobody's talked to him about approaching this as an exhibition. So we'll see how that goes when it happens.
Well, it should be a lot of fun. And I had a chance, second honeymoon down in Cancun, and had your book with me. And the amount of people who came up and asked me if I knew Al Bernstein, it was mostly in Spanish, but you had a great, you talked about Mike Tyson and how the first time you met him, and you were doing the Top Rank series, and he called you Mr. Bernstein, and that was, you said, watch out for people who call you Mr. Bernstein.
Yeah, well, that didn't, you know, now Mike Tyson and I have a very nice, cordial relationship. There was a little brief period in the middle where he wasn't too happy with the ESPN folks and the way they covered his trial, even though I had nothing to do with that. But there was a period there where, let's just put it this way, he wasn't calling me Mr. Bernstein. So, and which is interesting and ironic because if there's one thing I can say, it's that very few times have I had a relationship with boxers that is anything but pleasant. However, there was this one other guy, wasn't there?
Well, there, you know, and I forget his name, but he's talking about having a comeback in January. We haven't determined who he's going to fight, but that's Adrian Broner, your best friend.
Adrian Broner, yes, who is apparently going to return in January. They have not talked about his opponent, and of course, he's fighting on Showtime, where he fights, which means he and I will get a chance to exchange pleasantries once again, which I'm sure you know no one can wait for. The anticipation is great, and he's going to come back. So we'll see what he claims he's coming back as a 140-pounder, which is certainly more appropriate for him than coming back at 147 pounds, and. We'll see how it flies and who he'll fight. He hasn't had a win since, I think, 2017. He's had a draw and a couple losses. And so while he took time off, excuse me, for his rap career to skyrocket, I'm not sure if that has, he is now serious about boxing. We're joking around about it. I get a lot of people asking me, so how do you divest yourself in terms of, on the one hand, here's a guy that has clearly, apparently has a very rancorous relationship with you, or and has difficulty with you, and has in public been, not so nice. How do you, compartmentalize that and then just announce his fight like he's any other fighter? And, that's not a problem for me once the fight starts. It's all the leading up to it that you have to kind of get past. You have to get past the press asking you about it. You have to get past actually doing talent fighter meetings with him. You have to get past all that in some fashion. Once the actual match starts, honestly, I have the same attitude that I always have, and that is, you're just there to call a fight. And I know what his strengths are. I know what his weaknesses are. I know, I'm going to use the same kind of notes about, well, here's how many times he went 10 rounds. Here's how many times, he scored an early knockdown. Here's his lack of volume punching, and here's the times where he did more volume punching, and so that made him more effective. I just stick to all that and analyze the fight in front of me, and I'm in safe territory.
Well, it's always interesting when announcers have a challenge with the fighters and vice versa. And the one that I can remember is Larry Merchant got on the bad side of a couple fighters, including Floyd Mayweather, and that makes for great television.
Yeah, well, and here's the other thing. Larry Merchant, it depends on the broadcaster, and it depends on the fighter too, right? Because Larry Merchant was a completely different kind of broadcaster than I am. Everything about us is different in many ways. I mean, it's just a different approach and a different way of going at it. So you're going to get a different kind of a dynamic from that. And yeah, it did make for some intriguing television, that's for sure. So, and I'm a huge believer, that we're not really the story when boxing's happening. We're simply there to chronicle the events, help you enjoy it, enhance what you see in front of you. We are not meant to overpower the event. We're not meant to be the person you're thinking of specifically. Of course, I want people to enjoy my commentary. I want them to, for it to be memorable to them. But the goal is not to take the focus away from the fighters.
And last comment before we go to the questions. Maybe the group over at HBO didn't feel that way, because sometimes their announcers didn't really focus on the fight, I've noticed.
Yeah, it was a different approach. I always say it this way, and this is where this is the best and most diplomatic and maybe most accurate way for me to phrase it. There's two different ways to. There seems to have become two different ways to announce boxing. You can call the fight, which is the way our philosophy at Showtime has, all the time I've been there, has always been, and it's always been my philosophy in general on all broadcast teams I've worked, where you're focusing in on the fight at hand. There may be moments where you bring in outside extraneous factors, like where this fighter is in the pecking order of welterweights or middleweights, what somebody else just did because it has a bearing on them, that kind of stuff. But you're focused on that bout almost exclusively. Then there are some people that, and so you're literally reacting to what's happening plus throwing in anecdotal material. Some people discuss the fight as it's going on. And that's another approach, and that's become a very popular approach. This is true in sportscasting in general, for all sporting events, not just boxing. There is, do you want to discuss the event as it's going on without necessarily being always specific to what's happening? And that can lead you, of course, into areas, as you point out, Tripp, that they're discussing something that's completely irrelevant to what we're watching. Or do you want to just call it? And they had a philosophy that was much more in the discussion area.
Yeah, and it's nice to see. I think boxing fans are paying money or paying for Showtime or paying for a pay-per-view to watch the fight. and that they would vastly prefer commentators talking specifically about what they spent their money on.
Well, that's my opinion overall, and I think that's true in all sports. I want, whether it's that or it's a NBA basketball game, or I'm not suggesting that you can't do humor and make. And the first thing someone will say is, "Well, you and Morrow, just on this last show, you guys had some funny comments about extraneous, about pop culture references and whatever." Yeah, that's different. I mean, I don't mind any broadcaster bringing that in and having a fun moment for 20 seconds. That's different than, let's say, deciding you're going to discuss player A and for 4 trips back and forth in a basketball game. I don't want to hear 3 people discussing this specific power forward for 2 minutes while we've just seen 4 trips back and forth in the game and they've barely referenced it. That's just not what I want, and I don't want it in boxing either. Look,
well,
you got me all wound up, Tripp. Look what you did. Are you proud of yourself now?
Get you all wound up here early in the week. You've got a lot of work to do this week. Well, are you ready to get to the questions?
Pardon?
Are you ready to get to the questions?
Yeah, I believe I am. I'm going to do my best.
Okay. How important is it for boxing to have a good last quarter in 2020?
Yeah, that's a very good question that we got, and I'm not one of those people that talks about, oh my God, this guy is falling, and the sport needs this and the sport needs that. I tend to react in a more stoic way about different things that happen, and that sometimes actually bothers people. But in this instance, I'm going to say that it's pretty darn important for the sport of boxing that the rest of 2020 go well, that the good matches that we have on tap, that they actually produce, and that additional matches are added that are good. There are some really good matches on the board, and they need to, hopefully, fingers crossed, and you can never tell for sure, they need to be good. We've got the big pay-per-view we have coming up. Lopez Lomachenko, Wilder Fury. They're Spence and Garcia. A bunch of other fights. There's a number of them, and some at a slightly lower level than that look like they're great on paper. But the sport really needs to have them produce.
Well, fantastic. And by the way, one of the chapters in your book I really enjoyed where you talked about how the world of MMA fights and boxing can mutually coexist and help each other out. And with that regard, I really found that very interesting because a lot of people look at the antagonism between the sports.
Yeah, and it speaks in a way indirectly to this point because people always say, oh, look, if MMA is doing well and boxing isn't, or they're doing this and we're doing this, the two can coexist quite nicely, I think. And combat sports is a big tent.
Certainly. Next question, very interesting from the broadcast standpoint. Were you ever nervous to meet any famous broadcasters?
Yeah, it's intriguing. I've talked on this show about how when I first met Don Dunphy, who was a boyhood idol of mine, that I was nervous meeting him, and he set me at ease immediately because he was such a gracious man and became a friend and a mentor. But there were a few others. I met when I did the Hagler-Hearns fight in 1985. Kurt Gowdy was the host of the evening. And I was only 5 years into my broadcasting career. I had never met Kurt Gowdy. And, I kind of grew up in a way, not as a young man, but in a way I did, watching Kurt Gowdy. And so meeting him was and working with him I'm like, oh boy, this is a tricky one. And he was delightful, of course. And that's the one thing I can say about all these people I'm going to mention. They were wonderful. The other gentleman that was kind of daunting for me was Dick Enberg, who I met for the first time at the 1992 Olympics. Dick Enberg, to me, represents everything you want in a host/play-by-play announcer doing sports. He is everything that I want when I'm watching a broadcast. And to this day, one of my favorite announce teams of all time was him and Merlin Olsen, who I think were spectacular on football. and Dick did every sport. And when I met him, I said to myself, does Dick Enberg, is he even hip to me? Does he even know who I am? This is 1992. I'd been around for a while, but I don't know. He only did a couple of boxing matches in his life and did an excellent job on them. I think he did Ali Shavers on NBC or something along those lines. So I was at the compound, the Olympic compound in Barcelona, and I said, well, I'm going to just walk up to him and say hello. And, we're all there in the meal area. And I went up and I said, Dick, Al Bernstein. He said, well, sure, I know who you are. And I'm like, okay, well, that's good. We're past the first step. And he was very gracious, and we had a lovely conversation. I even had lunch with him. A week later, we were there, and he said, well, come on, let's go have lunch. And then he was asking me questions about, the Olympic boxing, and it was delightful. But yeah, I think when you reach the point in life where you're not nervous about bumping into somebody, not so much somebody that's famous, but somebody you respect, right? There's a difference, isn't there, in that?
Well, there is. And who is the worst person that? Oh, we can't do that, I guess.
See, you did it again. You want to be a career breaker, Trip. Every once in a while, there's this little. You know how they show the devil guy over here and the good guy over here. Your devil guy comes out every once in a while, and he wants to to get me in trouble. But someday you'll succeed, and I'll say something really controversial, and that'll probably be good for the podcast, right? Because it'll get all kinds of attention. So
exactly, and you never had the misfortune that I did of working with Robin Leach for a number of years. So.
Oh, Robin, he was a character. Yes, Robin was a character. Yeah,
he started reality television. But anyway, okay. And
I wouldn't think Robin was the easiest. All right, so we're gonna talk now to Tom Yankello, correct?
Yep, that'd be a lot of fun.
So this was an interview that I was interested to do because of two things. One, of course, Tom's working with Roy Jones Jr. for the Tyson fight. And secondly, because he's got a very unique YouTube channel that I will discuss with him, in which he does a lot of instruction. And it's a very popular channel. And that is intriguing since it's directed very much at people that are involved in the sport of boxing. So here is our conversation with Tom Yankello. Tom, thanks for joining us. It's a great opportunity to get a chance to talk to somebody who is doing a lot in teaching the sport of boxing. You've been a trainer, of course, for a long, long time, and now you've found a very unique way of communicating with folks that want to learn the sport of boxing through your world-class boxing channel. What was the thing that gave you the idea to do that?
Well, I just the love of the game, the love of the sport, and just wanting to give something back to the sport. I just feel like a lot of teachers in the sport are gone, and I just feel like the sport really needs a lot more teaching of the fundamentals of the game, and I think that it's dissipated over the years. And that's what I do on my channel. I really focus on a lot of teaching a lot of different styles of different boxers and different fundamentals of the game, and I try to give tips on the body mechanics of throwing punches and the art of defense, and just so on and so on. But it was just it's something that I wanted to really try to reach as many people as I can worldwide, and the YouTube is just a great way to do it.
It is. Your channel on YouTube has many, many videos in which you do demonstrations and give instructions. And the variety of the videos is interesting to me because, I think back in the Stone Age when I was an amateur boxer back in Chicago, I think of if there had been such a thing as YouTube and the internet and a world-class boxing channel, it would have been very beneficial, in addition to what the person that was coaching me did, to look at these videos. And is that kind of what you're thinking of, that this is going to augment other instruction that people get and maybe pique their interest in doing boxing?
Absolutely. And, and it's a great, channel to be able to help trainers as well, because, you know, boxing is in America, I mean, just worldwide is not as big as some of the other sports. So you don't have as many guys, and the revenue to be a coach is, it's not the greatest. So I think that's one of the reasons why, everybody's played football. Everybody, I mean, a lot of people play football, play basketball. So you always have people that have experience. And with boxing, you have a lot of people that go into coaching boxing just because they love the sport, but they don't really have a lot of experience.
Right.
So coaches in boxing that are coaches, I hate to say it, but by default, because they, they're looking for, volunteers. Like even myself, I have a hard time finding help for my gym, So to be able to train the trainers, if you will, sometimes, and in some of my videos, what I try to do, as well as help the fighters and the young fighters that, like I said, by default may have a lot of people helping them that don't have boxing experience or training experience, because just the way it is in the sport, right now.
That's a very good point. And a lot of these in the amateur gyms around the United States, the mission of amateur boxing goes beyond learning boxing, as you well know. And for those people that are involved in amateur boxing, they know it's about helping young men and women. So a lot of the boxing trainers, as you point out, have a smattering of experience, but they're really there to try and help these kids and these young people. So they may not have the greatest boxing training skills, but things like this can really enhance them. Now, you, of course, you've trained professional fighters and great amateurs over the course of your career. And one of the things that you are currently involved in right now is with one of the most famous boxers of the last 50 years. You are helping Roy Jones Jr. as he prepares for this November, it's November 23rd or 28th, right?
28th, yeah.
28th, November 28th match exhibition. We'll get into that about what it is with Mike Tyson. You have a long history, don't you, with Roy?
I do. We started working with each other about off and on. Well, we started about 10 years ago that we first started working with each other. We worked off and on from from about 2011 to 2014. We worked periodically with each other. I worked with him for 2 training camps for 2 of his fights in 2011, 2012. But I've also have done training with him all the way up to like 2015. Periodically, he would come and we would do training sessions together. So we built up a rapport over the years. So when this fight got announced, I just hit him up and just told him, I had done so many. It was kind of ironic, but I was actually going to do an instructional video on the peekaboo style on Mike Tyson, and I broke Mike Tyson down on probably a dozen occasions on my channel with short videos, but I was going to do an extensive thing on the peekaboo style, and this fight got announced. So, I just called Roy and I just told him, I said, this is like, really something we need to get back together and work on for this, work together for this fight. Because I know Mike, I've studied his style over the years, and it's one of my, really enjoyed him as a great fighter. And I know Roy, so I know what Roy has to do to be able to, capitalize on Mike Tyson's weaknesses and, to nullify his strengths. So it's something that what we're doing right now in camp.
So this event in November, how would you characterize it? Are you preparing Roy Jones for what you consider a full-on boxing match?
Yeah, we're taking it as that. We really are.
Okay.
I mean, we're not. The way we're looking at it is, from what I understand, the reason it's an exhibition is because there will be no judges, and the gloves are going to be 12 ounces instead of 10s. But other than that, I mean, it is, we're preparing for a fight. I mean, we're preparing for a fight because I don't think Mike Tyson really has. He doesn't. His gear is to come right at you. I mean, I don't know how he's going to fare in trying to, pull anything back and do anything less than what he's done his whole career. So, we're preparing for a real fight. And I mean, I just think I don't think there's been anything in the rules or anything saying that they're not going to fight. It's just the reason it's classified as an exhibition is just the simple fact that there are no there's not going to be a decision, and they're going to fight with a little bit bigger gloves. But we know that, I mean, what's that, a 12-ounce glove to a 10-ounce glove? Maybe it shuts down the velocity a little bit, but they get, it's not much of a difference in this thing.
How many rounds are they going to go?
And that's the other thing. Instead of it being a 12-round championship fight or a 10-rounder, it's going to be 8 rounds. Mm-hmm. Just 2 rounds less, 2 more ounces of glove on your hand. Still no headgear and no judges, but they're going to be, there's a lot of pride and ego, if you will, and going to be involved in this for bragging rights forevermore. So, we're definitely preparing for it as such, as a fight.
What has it been like getting back with the 2020 version of Roy Jones Jr. as opposed to the version of 8 or 9 or 10 years ago? What have you seen in him in terms of any differences physically or the way he approaches the sport, or even what he's learned just from additional time observing the sport and being involved in it? And of course, he is a fine trainer as well, so he works on that part of the sport all the time too.
Right, and I feel that he is much more. He's very in tune to more technical stuff than he was before. I credit that to being, like you said, he's been training boxers, and he sees it from a different viewpoint. And Roy was so dominant in his prime that he got away from a lot. And that's the only thing, like, I beg to differ with how great he was as not just an athlete, how great he was even as a technician. I think if you watch him in his prime, James Toney prime and middleweight prime, super middle prime, I mean, he showed a great skill set. Then when he went up to light heavyweight, I mean, he became so dominant that he almost became bored. And he started to develop some things that we could classify as, as bad habits. And some of the things that he did, he started to, like I said, break down some of his technical things, because just for the simple fact that he wasn't using them because he didn't need to, basic fundamentals and jabs and things that he didn't, that he was able to just put his hands down, even his hands behind his back, and do things to guys. Yeah. And he got away from those things, so that's where I come in and refresh his memory of the things that he's capable of doing. Because, I mean, Roy Jones, I could tell you, is much more than just a great athlete and, reflexes and speed. I mean, he has a great skill set. And if you go in the archives of his films and you really, really study him as a fighter, and you look at when he was a middleweight in his younger days, I mean, and as an Olympian, I mean, you see him doing, like I said, he has a broad skill set. He can adjust to anything. It's all about reminding him of these things, sharpening up the tools, refreshing his memory. So, like, a lot of things like that I'm doing in this fight is not studying just Mike Tyson. I'm studying Roy and showing him film of, look what you did here in this fight. Look what you did here.
Interesting.
Look how you made this adjustment. Look what you're capable of doing. You didn't do it in this fight when you should have been able to do it. It's not because you didn't do it. It's just because, for whatever reason, he needed that little bit of a reminder to say, this is, make this adjustment. And that's what a trainer's there to do, So we're working on a lot of things that he did as a middleweight for this fight, and a lot of things that he's probably only done, believe it or not, like I said, without letting the cat out of the bag, that he's done maybe only a few times in his career, but he's very capable of doing it. At the same time, of course, you're looking at the blueprint of what has been very successful for other guys fighting Mike Tyson. But as much as studying Mike, I've been studying Roy to be able to show him in his fights, look what you did here. This is what you need to do in this fight. Look what you did.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, I mean, certain things, like I said, in his fights that he's done, but maybe he hasn't done them in a long time. But he has it in his arsenal to do these things. And he has a great skill set. He developed some habits. Of course, we know in this fight, he can't be up against the ropes. The fights that he was up against the ropes are the fights that he, has had problems, So, of course, that's just a no-brainer. But there's a lot of the things in his skill set that he has that is going to, is really has the capability of giving Mike Tyson just fits. And Mike's had trouble with boxers in the past. And I also feel like, people are talking about Mike Tyson's power. I mean, Roy Jones he's had more fights than Mike, but he's actually knocked out more opponents than Mike. He has 47 knockouts. So he's a puncher in this fight too. And Mike's been inactive since 2005. Roy hasn't fought the high caliber guys, but at the same time, Roy only really retired like 2.5 years ago. He was still very active. So, go ahead.
Yeah, no, is this a version of Roy Jones in 2020? Have you found him to be physically capable of kind of doing the things in sparring that you've pointed out to him? Here's what you have to get back to. Have you seen him able to execute them?
Yeah, amazing, really amazing. I mean, even I'll tell you, it's like certain things, maybe physically, his hand speed is still just incredible. I mean, it's just incredible. His foot speed maybe not quite as well, but he's learned how to adjust to do certain things to make up for it. Where before, even when I worked with him in the past, he was kind of like lost because he didn't have his foot speed. So it was a big part of his arsenal. Even though he had the ability to adjust to it, he had been only using that part of his arsenal for so long as a light heavyweight because he was just bigger. I mean, he was just faster. Foot speed was incredible to the other light heavyweights. And when he was fighting middleweights and super middleweights, even though he had faster foot speed, he had to bring in more parts of his arsenal as a lighter guy. As he got heavier, when he went up to heavyweight, his foot speed was so dominant that that's really all he needed to do was to move his feet to get away from punches.
Okay.
So
interesting. You're kind of challenging the conventional wisdom by some that his getting away from the tech. Some people would argue that his technique wasn't as good as you say it was early in his career, but you can make a strong case for your case that he got away from it, and these are the things that you have to bring back. Let me ask you finally about that fight. You're banking a lot of this on the fact that Roy has been more active recently, which is true, no question about that, and that he, in effect, could be sharper. The other question I have is the length of the fight. Now, I did the last two Mike Tyson fights when he was active, the ones with Danny Williams and McBride. And while we've seen Mike Tyson, go like a maniac on the pads for a minute, we don't know how Mike Tyson's going to be when you get to round 4 or 5. And while Roy Jones is clearly older and he's in his 50s, part of this, I'm guessing, on your part, is based on what Mike Tyson will you see once it gets to round 3 or 4, assuming you guys can get it there.
Correct. And I think, like I said, that in order to get it there, it takes what I feel Roy has a lot more as he's gotten older being more cerebral. Um,
Yeah,
like I
that's a
said,
good point. And you hit on it before. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but training fighters, as he has. You know, people
right.
accused him, as you know well, Noah, of saying, well, he was athletic and he got by on that. And we all know that at parts of his career he did. But by training fighters, and he's been a very good trainer and successful one, this may have really helped him for this fight, huh?
Absolutely, absolutely. And even us working together, we're really jiving our thoughts together a lot better. Like I said, when I worked with him in the past, he was still, it's very foreign to him to step away from just being that great athlete and being so dominant, to be able to tap into these more technical things,
Yeah.
more cerebral things, to be able to like I said, like without letting the cat out of the bag, but obviously to set the pace and
Sure.
to do certain things that before he really never had to do, because he was just, you're talking about, I think I really do, even working with him at this age, and I work with all these young fighters as well, and you just realize that this guy is, if he isn't, I know I'm an historian, so I don't want to take anything away from anybody else, but just possibly the greatest athlete that's ever boxed, with physical talents. You know what I mean? Speed, hand speed, and foot speed. Floyd, of course, Floyd is very quick, but Roy is just, I just, it's hard for me to even fathom working with him now, how unbelievable he was in his 20s, and why he did get away from the things that he needs to do in this fight. That he actually, if you watch him coming up as a middleweight, even before he won the title and when he fought Hopkins, and then is, like I said, going into the James Toney fight, he has a great skill set. And even in other fights that you've seen, when he's had to do certain things on the inside, like, my point is, he could fight on the inside better than people realize that he can. And he has a tremendous skill set, defensively and offensively, combinations. A lot of times in the light heavyweights, he's only throwing one or two punches and the guys couldn't see it. He's knocking guys out. But to be able to throw combinations and bunches and punches, you have to really go back, maybe even as a middleweight and super, But he has all those tools. We're just sharpening them back up, refreshing his memory on things that he's done in the past and things that he will need to do in this fight. And he's really, making those adjustments. And he's been sparring some really, without naming names, some decent prospects that are, young guys in their 20s that, and he's just looked tremendous. So really, really looking forward to this fight. And we're real confident.
That's going to be fun. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And everybody will be looking forward to it November 28th. I want to mention that a reminder to everybody that Tom's channel, World Class Boxing Channel on YouTube, is really, really intriguing and fun to watch. You've heard Tom here, explain many of the nuances of boxing, and his videos do it in a much more elaborate fashion. So if you are a person, as you might well be watching this podcast, that has an interest in the sport overall, but certainly someone that is either involved in training or a young boxer or someone that aspires to be a young boxer, this channel will give you some great tips. Tom, I really appreciate you coming on, and I wish you the best of luck with Roy in November. And we may check back in with you after and get some of your thoughts then as well.
Definitely. I really appreciate you having me on, Al. Thank you.
All right, Tom. Thank you so much.
Have a good day now. Take care.
So our chat with Tom Yankello, I thought it was fascinating, and we will be interested in seeing him in the corner with Roy Jones Jr. when he takes on Mike Tyson. And Tripp, I know we actually have one more question from a viewer, and it's kind of appropriate at this point in the show.
Yeah, and our final question, do you have any boxing greats from the past coming up on the show?
I'm so glad that was asked, because we are going to have the terrific former champion Vinny Pazienza visiting with us. Of course, he not only was a champion in boxing, but had a feature film done on his story as he returned to the sport after a broken neck. It was one of the most extraordinary stories you could ever see in sports, in which he was able to show the grit and determination to come back to the sport and be really effective. So and he's a fun guy. Vinny is fun, and we'll talk about it when I'm with him. But my biggest fan in the world probably was Vinny's mom. She loved me. She used to bring cannolis to us when we'd be on set, like getting ready to cover a weigh-in or something. She'd show up and bring me cannolis. I mean, she was such a sweet woman. So I'm sure we'll get into that as well. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. Of course, as always, my thanks to Tripp for his fine work and also Lee for producing this podcast. And we'll see you next time.